Hey everyone, I'm Grant and welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I went over in detail why my BEW TDI would not work with my AW4 4-speed automatic. And the main thing of that whole video was my BEW TDI idles higher than what the AW4 automatic was designed for. Because my idle was set to 910 RPM, which is the factory idle for a BEW TDI. And it was my understanding at the time when I posted that video that the lowest you could make the idle was about 880 RPM, about 30 RPM lower, which really wouldn't help me. Well, after I posted that video that evening, I had several people reach out to me and say, hey, you know, a tuner can actually make it lower the idle, right? And I didn't know that. I did not know that. So I had to get the hardware so I could pull the tune off my ECU, send it to my tuner, wait for my tuner to make the updates to my tune, and then put it back on. And now, instead of idling at 910 RPM, fire in the hole. It now idles at 700 RPM. Smoothly too. Well, as smoothly as the diesel's gonna idle. What I now need to do is take it completely apart because I have the wrong torque converter in it. The torque converter that's currently installed, the stall speed is way too high. So over the next couple of days, I am going to be removing the torque converter that's installed and putting the stock torque converter back in it. And we'll see what happens. So it's the next day. I'm going to start dropping everything. I am not filming any of this. I have filmed and documented dropping my transmission on this swap so many times previously on this channel. It will save me a ton of time not having to film it. So I will report back once everything is back together and the stock torque converter is reinstalled. It's the next day. I was able to drop the transmission, swap the torque converter, and get everything reassembled yesterday. The other thing I did was go ahead and put actual coolant in the coolant loop because it's going to be freezing here, like well below freezing for the next week or so, and I just don't want to have to worry about cracking the block or anything. So what I'm going to do now is fire it up, see how it does. I then need to take it out and drive it a little bit because I need to get it up to temperature before I do some of the comparisons of putting it in and out of gear, because when it's cold it idles higher. But we're going to go ahead and make sure it still starts and everything sounds good and nothing leaks. Fire in the hole. Actually, I'm going to let the glow plugs do their thing real quick. I'm going to go drive it around and now I'll report back. I said I was going to drive it around a little bit and report back, but it's idling right now at about 800 RPM because it's freezing cold. But even putting it into gear at 800 RPM with the stock torque converter, just a hair of a bump, just like a boop, and that's it. This is night and day better than I was expecting. Okay, let's see how this does going into gear. Neutral. Oh my God. That is so much better. Oh, I missed this torque converter. this torque converter was so much better once you were moving than the other torque converter. It's not that the other torque converter was bad, it just wasn't the right torque converter for this setup. Now I am going to be keeping an eye on the coolant gauge, only because, well, I'm running coolant in it. Oh, and I didn't speak about that. So one of the things I missed during filming is on TJ Wrangler radiators, at least later model ones, because I've always owned ones that were made after 2003. There's a peacock on the bottom of the radiator that you can open to drain the coolant. Well, this most recent time, I decided to just remove the peacock to drain it faster, and so much sediment and debris came flowing out of it. So I ended up flushing it with hot water, and it just kept coming. So I kept flushing it with hot water until it was kind of clear. I'm curious to see if that has helped with any of my temperatures. That being said, it's not really a apples to apples comparison right now, because it is about 34 degrees outside. So I also don't expect it to get too terribly hot. This torque converter, in combination with the 700 RPM idle tune that I got from Techmetronics, is about perfect. Now, I have no complaints. But on an interesting note, earlier I mentioned how I pulled the peacock plug out of my radiator and all the sediment and everything else came out of my radiator, and I kept clearing it out. I realize it's really cold outside, but I have the electric fan unplugged because diesels take a while to get heat in the winter anyways. I've been driving for a good 15 minutes, and without an electric fan on my radiator running at the moment, my coolant is holding right at 160 degrees. Yeah. And whenever I stop at stoplights now, because the idle RPM is so low and the engine's not creating a load, which isn't trying to push fluid through the torque converter, which is not trying to push me through at a stoplight, everything starts cooling down every time I get to a stoplight with no electric fan. This thing is awesome. Okay, now I'm climbing kind of a long-ish hill where I live. We're up to about 650 degrees on EGTs. We're holding about 10 pounds of boost. We're at about 2,300 RPM, or 2,500 RPM, because the torque converter is not locked. And we're finally hitting 170 on the coolant temperature. I might have to take this coat off because I'm actually getting a lot of heat in here now. I do have a sweater underneath, or it's not a sweater, fleece, pull over your head thing. I don't know what it's called. I'm not into fashion. All right, brought the Jeep back into the shop now that everything's up to temperature. I've triple checked everything. Everything's looking really good. In my last video, I used this action camera to point at the rear drive shaft. I wanted to see what the rear drive shaft was doing when I put the transmission from park into reverse, then neutral, then drive. I'm going to replicate that same thing because I want to see what it's doing now with the 700 RPM idle tune. Couple of interesting things about those two clips, and this is now being edited out of order because I've been watching those clips back to back. On the 910 idle RPM, or the stock idle speed on this BEW TDI, when you put it into reverse or drive in those clips, you definitely see the drive shaft is rotating more than the 700 RPM idle tune. But what's interesting to me is to not watch the drive shaft. Go back and watch the body of the Jeep. So the rear tire and the suspension. When you put it into reverse at 910 RPM, you see the Jeep move backward and it kind of loads up the suspension going backwards. You put it into neutral, you see the Jeep kind of rest. And when you put it into drive, it does the same thing again going forward. It kind of picks up the body because the drivetrain is fighting against the brakes. And that kind of perfectly explains what I have been fighting with this swap with the automatic transmission. Now you go back and watch the 700 RPM idle tune. The drive shaft is moving, but it doesn't move nearly as much as the stock idle speed on this BEW TDI. But watch the body lines, watch the suspension, watch the rear tire. It's not loading up the suspension when I go into reverse or drive. And furthermore, I can now just leave it in drive on my gravel driveway and it doesn't climb the hill. I just found that really fascinating, and that really encapsulates what I have been fighting with this diesel automatic build. So anyway, back to the rest of the video. I will say, it does feel a bit ironic that I spent weeks trying to figure out how to solve all the problems I was solving, put out a video saying this engine wasn't necessarily compatible with this transmission because of a design philosophy. And the day I post that video, I get a message saying, hey, by the way, we use the same tuner and he can adjust the idle down to 700 RPM now. That's just how life happens. The second you post online that something doesn't work and you can't get it to work and here's all the stuff you've done, inevitably there will be someone else that goes, well, I ran into that same problem and here's how I fixed it. So Kyle's the one that actually messaged me. Thank you so much for telling me about this tune. And I'm gonna link his channel down below as well. He's done some neat swaps, so definitely go check out his channel. Also, need to give a huge shout out to David as well. David is another guy that I talk to a lot on all of this stuff. He has a ALH swapped CJ7 and an ALH swapped XJ Cherokee that did have an AW4, and he tried getting it working as well, but switched it to, I believe, an AX15. Don't quote me on that. And he also has a channel, and I'll link his channel down below as well. Go give both of those channels some support. This is a community effort, and without their help, this stuff wouldn't have gotten done. I think this is the first time since 2018, when this was all stock with the 4-liter and the 42 RLE 4-speed automatic, that this kind of runs and drives like a normal Jeep should, as crazy as that sounds. Now, I have not done interstate speeds, but I have done 55 to 60 miles per hour. And it does what it should. I mean, I'm to the point where I'm kind of keeping an eye on temperatures. My coolant is now holding at 170 degrees. Now, I put a 185 degree thermostat in it during the summer because I was having major cooling issues. I kind of want to wait until the weather gets warm again and see what it does. But I might be going back up to a stock thermostat, which is, it's like 92C. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. So, but the fact that I can just come up to a stoplight, hit the brakes. I mean, you can almost not even hear the engine at 700 RPM. The blower fan for my heat and AC is louder than the engine at idle now. And I will say, it has not stalled once yet. something I was worried about because of the vacuum brakes and power steering. I really was worried at 700 RPM the engine might stall. But this tune from Techmetronics is amazing. Which actually I should also thank Techmetronics. I will link, I think he only has a Facebook page right now, but I will link his Facebook page down below. I'm about to bring in the Wrangler, and I just noticed coolant on the floor, which is not ideal. But the weird thing is, this is about, maybe that's the back of the engine. I might need to check for coolant leaks. This is normally where I park it. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. Definitely it's full of coolant. I don't know, I'm going to have to investigate that. Overall, this is a massive success. So the BEW TDI with an AW4 with the A340 valve body with the stock torque converter that came in an XJ Cherokee with a 700 RPM idle tune from Techmetronics. And this combination, in my opinion, works. Now, low range is a little rough right now, but I do have a Rubicon transfer case in it. So instead of being 2.72 to 1, it's 4 to 1. So I am actually debating going back to a more normal transfer case, probably the MP231, but I do have, I think it's a MP242. It was the Selectra track or Command track. I can't remember what it was, but it was an option for the XJ Cherokee. It came with this AW4 automatic that I bought 2 years ago. So I might also be running that just because I have all the parts for it. But anyway, this works. Thank you again, Kyle, for reaching out to me after I posted my last video. Thank you, Techmetronics, for getting me a 700 RPM idle tune. And just really quick off the top of my head, thank you, David, thank you, Ted, and thank you, HGM Electronics, who make the CompuShift. I have been talking to all of those individuals a lot to make this project where it is today. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to all the people that watch, comment, and everything. It really helps me stay motivated after failure after failure after failure that I've had in the last 6 years of this build. But I am quite happy to finally say, I think I have a working combination. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again sometime soon. Goodbye.